Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
With the economy in meltdown, will there be an impact on the Broadway theater as well? We're here with two top Broadway producers to discuss it.
We are joined tonight by James Freydberg, who has produced on Broadway Full Moon, Burn This, Master Harold and the Boys. Jim is a veteran of the Broadway theater and was around in the 70s when things were sort of dark and gloomy, which they may become again. And joining Jim is our old friend Emanuel Azenberg, the producer of Spring Awakening, Moving Out, The Odd Couple, and a host of Neil Simon plays. And Manny, you too went through this business when it was not in the boom times as it's been in the last almost 15 years now.
15.
Can you guys give me a sense of what Broadway was like in the 1970s when, you know, Gerald Ford was saying to New York City, drop dead? Is that painful?
Well, the theaters were empty.
Yeah.
There wasn't, I think it was down to, in the summer, there were 8 productions on Broadway. It was that difficult. But I think the conditions are totally different now.
You do?
Oh, totally.
You do. Do you have a sense, though, Jim, that this industry, which has posted, you know, billion-dollar-a-year grosses for the last several years, that has raised ticket prices for, you know, to $250, $325 for premium price seats, tax on, you know, $25 extra sit on the aisle, do you think all this is coming to an end?
I mean, basically, the entire situation that we're seeing in the economy right now, and this convulsions with the Secretary of the Treasury and all the banking system and Wall Street, is really only about one thing: greed, and not playing by the rules, just having no rules.
Has this happened on Broadway?
It has absolutely happened on Broadway. It's happened in every industry. And what's interesting is it's kind of funny that the public doesn't seem to, they keep blaming it on everybody else, but they're part of the problem as well, because they've been greedy as well. They took on mortgages that they couldn't afford. They then started borrowing money against their houses and buying. Nobody looked at what might happen if something went wrong. Oh, nothing can go wrong. And it's all about greed, and it's very frightening because where we are now is much different than we were, for instance, in other bad economic periods where actually Broadway did pretty well. We now have a situation where the dollar was up to, against the pound, $2 against the dollar. There were many reasons why Europeans came over. But that was all based on the fact that oil is traded in dollars. That was what a lot of that was, and now oil starts to move down, the dollar starts to devalue. Where's the audience going to be, since a large percentage of the audience that we had was coming
foreign
from
tourists? All right, Manny, specifically, what are you seeing in ticket sales to indicate to you that things are beginning to, you know, get into some trouble here on Broadway?
I think that they're specific. As we speak now, you can kind of count on 31 Broadway theaters being occupied.
Right.
If you look at it very carefully, it's very reasonable to assume that by January, 15 of those shows could be gone. Very reasonable. 5 or 6 are automatically gone. There are only 4 shows booked for the spring.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, it's Mary Stuart, West Side Story, the 9 to 5 musical,
right,
and maybe one or two others.
Right.
But if 15 shows go, and you can count on a lot of that, and 1 or 2 of the shows that come in don't work, you're going to have 8 empty theaters.
So,
Bango.
Does this mean now that theater owners are going to have to start to get creative again, and rather than sit around waiting for you guys to bring shows to them, start doing something maybe they should have been doing, which is to plow all the money they've made these years into developing new work?
I try not to use the word creative.
They're in the real estate business, you know.
They have to do something.
They are part of the producing process, but they're actually in the real estate business. So the reality is, are they going to do what they finally had to do in the late 70s and the 80s, begin to support creative producers financially so they could get product?
Yeah.
Now, everything moves in cycles, and the theater business is a very cyclical business, and so we may be moving back to that type of cycle. And are they prepared to do that? That's questionable. We don't know whether they're prepared to do that.
Is it true that when the Schubert organization in the early 70s was really falling apart, and the 2 guys who came in to run it, Jerry Schoenfeld, who's still the chairman, and Bernie Jacobs, dead now, that they had to start producing because they simply did not have the product to put into theaters that I think were literally crumbling at that time.
Without question. That they had to throw a lot of money around because it became not a good business for real independent producers. I mean, I survived, frankly, because of Neil Simon.
Yeah.
But it is very marginal for an independent producer, Jim, myself, who actually make a living doing it. I'm not talking about rich people. I'm talking about people who said, if the show was profitable, that's how I survived.
Right.
So it became not profitable. So you see who's evolved into being the producers over the last 30 years is wealthy people and the theater owners, because it suits them. It's like giving you 3 months free rent. You produce in order to get a show into your theater.
Well, Jim talked
but
about...
it is different now. It's really different now. That was the issue then. And if you recall what the top ticket price was $15, guys. That was Chorus Line in '75. The top ticket price was $15. Now the ticket price is $1 trillion. And the costs are way up there. Well, we've hit a ceiling on what you can charge.
For the top ticket price.
Yes, because the era of the premium ticket will diminish radically, except for the giant successes.
Right.
A few banks that used to buy tickets at inordinate prices are out of business.
Right.
A few investment banking houses are out of business, and you can't be that indulgent.
Who can afford to come?
They're not going to spend that kind of money, so you'll diminish the audience. The money has diminished.
Yeah, the production,
because
the money
people
for the
used to throw money into the theater a little bit. It's happened very quickly in the last, and we all know a number of people who've been hit by it. And people that used to put in $500,000 are putting in 100,000, and people who put in 100,000 are saying no.
No.
So, but what we've done in between is we went from a musical costing $2.5 million to costing $15 and $20 million. And that has to come to an end. That's an overpriced item that's going to take quite a while to come down, because now you have to reduce all the union costs, all the management expectations.
Right.
Well, this is what I normally get. I normally get $10,000.
But isn't this culture of greed that you're talking about part of what's made the Broadway industry in this bloated condition, that the producers are taking so much money with their, what do they call that fee that they tack on, that they...
It's chump change.
Right,
Sorry.
you know, whether they charge you...
It's really not a lot of money. That's really not a lot of money.
It's really not a lot.
No.
You mean the fee for restoring the theaters?
For restoring the
restoration.
restoration
That's not the
fees?
producers, please.
That's not the
theater
producers.
owners.
That's the theater owners.
All right, the theater owners. But what I'm saying is the greed in the ticket prices being proportionately so high to the cost of living.
Yes.
Isn't that part of the?
Yes, we even have an expression in the theater called the net gross. Figure that one out.
Do you see, if this industry gets into trouble, as the city may get into trouble, do you see any way that the unions would actually say, all right, we can't charge these high ticket prices anymore, so we unions are going to have to give something up to help this industry? Do you see that happening?
Not exactly. I think it's going to be really difficult. And because the habit of letting negotiations go on and making settlements through the years has gone on for so long that the level that they're at, they're not. We saw that in the stagehands situation. They weren't really willing to give up certain things. And then you have, like we're having right now in the Senate, the Republicans are saying they have a Republican president, but they're not agreeing to this $700 billion. But the Democrats, this is what happens. This is the same process that ends up in everything that ends up in greed, always ends up that way. This is a perfect example right now, is that the two baseball teams have come up with two gigantic stadiums. And why? So they could sell big seats at high prices to corporations who now aren't going to buy them. You know, that's really interesting, because we now have a ticket price on Broadway, this so-called extra ticket price of the special seat for $400 and some odd. They're not going to buy those either. And we're beginning to see that this is all. But the unions are looking at you and saying, "But you're getting $400 a ticket, not $100. You know, where are we in this? And why should we give back?"
Yeah.
And so it's very complicated, and this is affecting everybody in our industry, not just our industry, every industry. I don't want to just say that it's theater, because it's everything, and not good.
Let's talk about the quality of shows, though. I mean, can you make the argument that when you have all this money around, when you're living off the tourist trade, when over 60% of your audience is from outside of the country and you want to give them the big mega spectacle musicals, the dopey Mamma Mia type things. In a leaner time, if you have to then sort of depend not so much on the tourists but on New Yorkers, might you have to sort of raise the quality of the kind of shows you're producing to get people to part with their dwindling bucks, to give them something that is really, really good and not just sort of dopey entertainment that
I think you mean really
so
original.
Yeah.
Because New Yorkers are sophisticated, and they don't seem to want to go to revivals necessarily. They will flock to something that's new and different, something they haven't seen before. That could be a byproduct of this, but the off-Broadway situation is very serious. The costs to rent an off-Broadway theater are too high. The cost of the ticket is too high. There is no off-Broadway anymore. So we've lost the kind of backbone of where we develop writers, where we develop talent. And that is a very serious loss, and that's why most of them are running out to California to do television.
There was, when the theater was artistic, and there were people like Miller and Williams and Inge and O'Neill and Kern and Rodgers and Hammerstein and Lerner and Lowe and Gershwin and Cole Porter. That's not chump change. Those are big-time people. There was an equilibrium between money and art. You're asking about aesthetics. That equilibrium existed for about 50 or 60 years. Shocking. And it ended probably in the 70s, some point, and that equilibrium got, it's like taking the wolves out of the wilderness. 10, 12 years later, you're not going to have deer.
But when O'Neill,
for whatever reason, all those balances.
When O'Neill was down at the Provincetown Playhouse, he wasn't getting the big money, but there was an off-Broadway for him to learn how to do.
It was a Broadway.
O'Neill was a Broadway player.
They all had agents, and they all got paid. Williams got paid, and Miller got paid, and Kern got paid.
They got paid well. They were successful.
No, but Jim's talking before they get paid.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Moss Hart and Kaufman, they owned Broadway theaters. They not only wrote plays, they directed them, they directed films, Moss Hart did, and they were really men of the theater, and they didn't think about anything. That was their life. And it was a different situation in that what's happened now is that also they were producers as well. What's happened now is that producers over the last 20 years have become more presenters than producers. I blame some of this on Frank Rich, because what Frank Rich was a critic
of the New York Times,
the New York Times critic, who was an extraordinarily brilliant critic, who went around the world and the country and saw shows and then announced what he thought of them by writing a review, and then a so-called producer went in and, Frank Rich liked it. It was an automatic bring-in. That was really the basis of the Schubert organization producing at that time as well. What did Frank Rich say? So we didn't really develop producers in that time, and also we had strange things. A lot of producers in the past were people who were developed through the business, like Manning. They were company managers, they were managers, and they came up and they really learned the business. But then we had a union at that time who closed the doors to new young people coming in. So at the same time we were losing young people to learn to be producers, and at the same time we were having producers become really presenters. And when Frank Rich left, what happened? Revivals, because that was the only thing people knew. And you know something, we're kind of in that period again, because we don't really have many people who have developed product. What we have is people who say, I'll do that because I know what it is, because I saw the film, or I'll do that because I saw it as something else, or but they're not where the audiences have been the largest historically, and what people don't seem to understand is when things were developed for the theater, like Chorus Line, that weren't something from something else, and until we begin to develop more producers, and they're not just very wealthy people who are putting down checks for things they're familiar with.
Right.
Then we're going to have a better theater. We don't have that yet again.
The producers are part of it, but it's about artistry. It's ultimately about the aesthetic part. Where are the writers? Where are the directors? Where are the actors? The actors are doing films. We can't compete financially with what gets paid for film and television. But what we used to be able to compete with was art, aesthetics. So that if you won the Tony, or if you were judged by how good an actor you were on the stage, not in a film. Jason Robards did a play every year. This was the class place. We have to reestablish that.
Do you really think that this industry could really fall apart, Jim? Could things get dire? Could we have empty theaters? Could we have a handful of shows and that's it?
That's part of the cycle, yes, I do. Will it happen this year? No, but will it happen over the next few years? Yes. And there's also an interesting thing about this. There's some very long-running musicals who aren't going to go away so quickly, and there's going to be this whole thing of people having to figure out if they're going to do a musical, it may have to be smaller and play in a playhouse. I mean, those things will automatically begin to maybe cut the cost of things as well. But I do think the cycle is about to go the other way, but it's going to take about 3 years before it really happens.
Now, what, from your organization, the League of American Theaters and Producers, or I think it has a new name now, the Broadway League. They change it all the time. I can't keep up with it. The kind of sense you get from the official word of these people who represent you guys is that, you know, even in troubled economic times, people still want entertainment. And during the Great Depression, Broadway actually did quite well, because even if people don't have any money, they still have the need to go out and be entertained. That's the line I'm getting officially from Broadway.
But let's assume let's assume there's some truth to it. And what were the ticket prices then?
A nickel.
Right. And what are they now?
$110 for the balcony.
Exactly. And that's a major difference. It changes the equation.
Well, and also people didn't have the internet and television or anything else.
In the last 25 years, the advent of screens.
Yeah.
Including from the Game Boy to these Blackberries, to computers, to television, everything is competition. I went to the theater as a kid, and I'm from the Bronx. I saw everything. It was $1.20, $1.80. My children don't. I have to drag them out of the room. They can sit in front of those machines and be entertained. So there is a competition which we have to overcome, and my generation isn't going to overcome it. My generation isn't going to do anything about it. There's got to be somebody coming along, younger, who says, no more. The Rupert Goulds. And the young producer like Rupert Gould, who says, we're changing this. And he brings 5 major actors with him, and they start something. Because you get the good actors and a good director, we'll all go to the theater. Everybody will go. Good stuff they go to. When the History Boys came, you couldn't get a ticket, and they didn't have to take an ad.
Yeah.
You don't have to live by the old rules. Well, we have to advertise, we have to do this.
Here at the City University of New York Graduate Center, where we tape this show, they're today having the Prelude Festival of downtown theater companies, very experimental work. And these being the artists that are coming up into the next decade. But my concern is that this huge financial meltdown that's going on will heavily impact the opportunity for younger artists to even develop at all. And I'm talking before they start making money. I'm talking about at times when there's developmental apparatus for young artists to come and get some kind of chops and express their ideas. Is that going to go away to a certain extent because of this depression which seems to be coming? Jim?
Well, first of all, I don't think a depression is coming.
You don't,
but,
all right.
But,
other than being depressed.
other than being
that
depressed.
can always be here. All right.
Which is right. I think it's a little different than that. I think that what they don't have is that off-Broadway, off-Broadway shelter that they had to begin to work in. That's the frightening thing to me, that we have ignored that and not realized that what's happened there is that there's been a lot of new buildings built, and the costs have been tremendous. And unless that begins to happen, unless the nonprofit theaters begin to realize that they also have a responsibility to develop new writers, which some do and some don't, then I think we are in trouble. I think then it's going to continue to move there, which is a whole different thing than whether there's a depression or not. That's a separate issue altogether.
I use the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying.
Well,
economic downturn.
An economic downturn is not necessarily what our problem is. Our problem was the economic upturn, which eliminated the ability to really support artists because people became more interested in other things, and Broadway became this special place for very wealthy people.
Are these mega rich people, we all know who they are, they're not really producers, they're people who made a fortune in real estate and other places, and they get to be instant producer overnight. Are these people going to scatter? Or do they have enough money they'll be insulated from it and they'll still play on Broadway?
I think it's going to impact on all the wealthy people.
Really?
It has to.
And they're going to
a lot of this money came from Wall Street people, one way or the other.
Yeah.
So Wall Street has been, I mean, the investment banking houses aren't there. The bonuses that everybody got at the end of the year, those trillions of dollars that boosted up real estate prices and that allowed people to play at $200,000 and get their name above the title, it's diminished. The money is hard to get right now. There are two major players that I have. They're not peripatetic. They've been here, and they called me and said, "This is not a good time." They used to put in $500,000 on
Just
anything.
like that, yeah.
And it's now 100 or 200, and they're now being very selective.
100 or 200.
I'll tell you what has
Listen,
gone.
well, we joked before on the show that the first show I ever did was The Lion in Winter. It was $150,000 capitalization. That play right now would be $3 million. So 100 or 200 was the entire capitalization. Now, you have to get 15 200s to make $3 million. And there aren't going to be their plays are the first things to suffer. Just take a look at what's coming in. Almost all of them are revivals.
Right.
And there are 2 or 3 maybe original plays, but they're not really originating on Broadway, are they?
No.
So Broadway, we used to do plays. Remember that New Haven, Boston, come into New York?
Yeah, well, that's about it.
It's gone.
Yeah.
But that's the loss of the art of producing, too. That's this whole thing about supporting artists, because, you know, when you're talking about supporting artists, the first money that's left, that's vanished, is development money. That was a big key to many producers who develop. They would go to somebody, they say, I'm developing this, and they would get a certain amount of development money to begin to get it off its feet. Suddenly, that money is gone. That's completely gone. And now where you are is who's going to put that money up? Well, if you're a real producer, you're not in the money, you're not in the investment business, you're in the development business. And you need those investors. I see that as a very serious problem right now. Really serious, because without that, what I call front money, development money, whatever it is, that's gonna take a lot of things and put them to the side.
Look at what that
Those guys are
process
vanishing.
was.
Yeah.
Your playwright would give you his play, a first draft, and you'd say, I like this play. And you give him $2,500 or $5,000 in the old days. And the ultimate goal was to get the play on Broadway, where he would then make a living.
Right.
If it worked, he didn't have to write screenplays. He didn't have to write a television piece. He would make a living and also get the Congressional Medal of Art. It was quality. That process is gone. Because what is substituted for it is not-for-profit. So you may get the $2,500 or the $5,000, but then they get 6 weeks somewhere, and then he still has to write a screenplay. Because you can't make a living on that.
On the nonprofit stuff. What's going to happen, we only have a minute left, what's going to happen to the big corporations on Broadway now? Disney, DreamWorks is now coming on with Shrek. I mean, are they in it for the long haul, or are they going to be in some trouble too? I see the grosses for Little Mermaid and Mary Poppins plunging.
I think that that's a kind of a different situation, because film companies don't have to be in the theater business. They are in attempting to enhance the properties that they own and create more income on them. But theater is, you know, once the show's closed, it's gone. And I think after a while, if it's a very cottage industry with big visibility, and I think if the film companies begin to see that the publicity about them and the reviews are not good and the audiences aren't, I think they'll run away from this business. They're not really here to stay. They're here while it's an opportune time. That's what the film business is anyway. And so I think that I don't know what will happen.
So if a Shrek doesn't make it, you don't see DreamWorks, you know, pulling a bunch of their titles off the shelf and turning them into musicals as Disney's
We've gone through that period where every movie is now being considered. I mean, I actually saw people came into the office with the possibility of doing the gunfight at the OK Corral. And another one was Shane. Shane the musical. I mean, but that will subside. It's like a fever. It'll go away.
But because of Chicago, something else is happening also, and that is that film companies are now looking to the New York stage to possibly take
for material.
some film that we made into a musical and now make it into a musical film. So both hands are back and forth. So I can't say that I think that creates loyalty. That's a diminishing thing too. You know, so
right.
I'm not so sure that we can say that the film companies are going to stay in this business. They certainly weren't trying to buy the theaters, were they?
Right. Any chance? Last quick question. Any chance that if things get really bad, these companies that own theaters on Broadway are going to fall apart, and Broadway theaters could be on the market?
I don't think so. I think that it's possible that the theaters will be sold to somebody else, but
But no,
they'll be there.
And we'll never go to that situation.
Remember, they're landmark. So.
Right. So we're never be in the situation as we were in the 70s where those great old theaters were being knocked down to build.
No, that's not going to happen.
That's
and,
not.
They're
So
a
the
commodity.
theaters-
They're special things.
So they'll be beautiful,
Only
they'll
a
be
work of
standing,
art.
and they'll be empty.
Right.
Would be empty.
No, I think that it's a joke. It's not a joke. I think you'll start seeing empty theaters. How deep this recession is, you'll know about a year and a half from now. Is that in the next year, if there aren't enough replacements, because if the scenario of losing 15 shows and only being replaced by 4 continues, right?